All right, so we have been keeping up with how absurdly wealthy the billionaire class around the world has been getting over the course of the pandemic, while the poorest and most vulnerable people within our societies have been getting shafted at the same time. It's been essentially what economists call a K-shaped recovery, and I got some data here for you guys that puts this into full perspective, because the amount that they have amassed over just this crisis has been completely absurd. But again, this is something we know to exist very consistently. Whenever there is a crisis, this is the idea of disaster capitalism. Whenever there is a crisis like this, the most powerful and wealthy people within society are going to use it as an opportunity to further consolidate their power and wealth. So this is exactly the result that we could expect. Billionaires added $5 trillion to their fortunes just during the pandemic. So let's just go ahead and get into some of the details, because honestly, it gets worse the more that we get into it. So from London CNN Business, billionaires added $5 trillion to their fortunes during the pandemic, according to Oxfam, exacerbating economic inequality and the pandemic, as the pandemic pushed millions of people around the world into poverty. And they say, using data compiled by Forbes, Oxfam says in a new report that the total wealth of billionaires jumped from $8.6 trillion in March of 2020 to $13.8 trillion in November of 2021, a bigger increase than the previous 14 years combined. Okay, that's absolutely mind-blowing. But they continue saying the world's richest 10 men saw their collective wealth more than double, shooting up $1.3 billion per day. Okay, and they continue with a quote saying, billionaires have had a terrific pandemic. Central banks pumped trillions of dollars into financial markets to save the economy, yet much of that has ended up lining the pockets of billionaires riding a stock market boom. Yeah, no shit, it's precisely exactly what everybody understood would happen at the beginning of the pandemic, when the US government decided, let's give a bunch of, trillions and trillions of dollars, pumping that into the stock market to pop it up and to prop it up and pumping it full of liquidity, and also giving, trillions of dollars of handouts to corporate America to be able to, protect their payrolls. Meanwhile, they used it on executive bonuses and stock buybacks, while firing tons of their workers, reducing the health and safety standards within their workplaces during the pandemic, needlessly killing people, jeopardizing their health, and basically screwing over their workers at every step along this process. So this is exactly what you would expect to see from a government that is completely bought and controlled by corporate America, just like the US government is. But again, I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? Billionaires got significantly richer, largely with our money, right? Largely with publicly subsidized money that was coming from the federal government to save the economy, right? And I mean, listen, this is coming at the same time that we have motherfuckers like Joe Manchin coming out here and saying, literally behind closed doors, that he thought that families and parents were going to use the measly crumbs of the child tax credit on drugs. Okay, this is literally what our political elites are saying is the reason for why we, the American people and average working class families, don't deserve a child tax credit, which apparently cut child poverty in half. Okay, he's saying instead of cutting child poverty in half, which should ask further questions of why child poverty exists in the first place in this country, but I mean, he's literally saying that a policy that cut child poverty in half should be canceled, because he thinks, without any evidence or justification whatsoever, that they're going to buy drugs with it. Okay, meanwhile, again, we have billionaires literally just lining their pockets with trillions of dollars over the course of the pandemic. Okay, yeah, I'm sure that they're using that money much more responsibly than those parents who would have spent it for, I don't know, like food and education and healthcare and clothing for themselves and their children. Okay, it's just completely ridiculous. But again, I don't understand how we're not seeing people out in the streets with the pitchforks, as the billionaires we're about to get to, pretty afraid of right now. But they continue with a little bit more information here, saying the combined wealth of the top 10 billionaires, including Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, doubled during the pandemic and is now 6 times greater than that of the world's poorest 3.1 billion people. Okay, let me just say that again. All right, these motherfuckers, the top 10 billionaires, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, their wealth doubled and is more than 3.1 billion people. Okay, 3.1 billion people have less wealth than the top 10 in the world. All right, that's not a sustainable economic system, regardless of if you're looking at it from the perspective of those people who are suffering under this, poverty scheme of capitalism, or whether you're looking at it from the perspective of the billionaire class themselves, as they are shoving people down into poverty at a scale that we have almost never seen before. Okay, the pandemic pushed nearly 100 million people into poverty, okay? And they're obviously struggling to escape. Wow, surprising. But 100 million people, this is even a low estimate, right? Because if you go and look at the nuances of how they calculate these numbers and the thresholds that they actually consider to be counting as poverty, okay? Even somebody who is, just above this poverty threshold and wouldn't be included in that 100 million number, they still are not doing well, okay? They're just like barely subsisting, right? So this 100 million number is even a low count, all right? But we're talking about hundreds of millions of people who have been shoved into poverty as billionaires are amassing trillions and trillions of dollars. And it seems like they're starting to somewhat realize the situation right now and how completely unsustainable it is for even their own positions within society, okay? So this is a great breakdown here from Jake Johnson from Common Dreams, so I'll link this down below. But apparently 100 plus ultra rich people warned fellow elites, quote, "It's taxes or pitchforks," okay? So let's just go ahead and check in with this. This was basically coming up on the Davos summit that's coming up at the World Economic Forum. But basically, I mean, we have over 100 millionaires and billionaires basically pointing out the fact that this economic inequality that exists at a mass scale around the world right now is completely unsustainable even for themselves. So they say in an open letter published amid the corporate-dominated virtual Davos summit, 102 rich individuals, including such prominent figures as Disney heiress Abigail Disney and venture capitalist Nick Hanauer, warned that history paints a pretty bleak picture of what the end game of extremely unequal societies looks like, okay? He's pretty right there. I mean, go and look at the historical record and see what happens, like in, revolutionary France, and you see what happens to the political elites when they laugh at the poor and they say, let them eat cake over and over and over again. Sometimes heads are going to be rolling in the streets. That's just an inevitable reality of creating a society that is this unequal and this unsustainable. Again, the situation right now that we have is even more unequal than it was in the revolutionary France period, okay? It's even more unequal than the Gilded Age, okay? So we are in like unprecedented, unequal times right now as a global society, and especially even here just within the United States, all right? This is something we have never seen before at this level, right? So they should be shaking in their boots. They should be afraid that the pitchforks are going to be coming out. But they say, quote, "For all of our well-being, rich and poor alike, it's time to confront inequality and choose to tax the rich," the letter reads. "Show the people of the world that you deserve their trust," okay? So this part is just absolutely laughably hilarious because first of all, they think that like taxes are the solution to the problems that capitalism is creating right now. It's not, okay? You don't deserve the trust of the people of the world, as you are saying right here. The problem is not that you have, $100 billion versus having $60 billion, right? Even if we tax you at 90%, okay, it still would not be a fair system as an economic structure, right? Even if you took 90% of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the rest of those 10 billionaires' money from them, that's not the problem. The problem is the inherently authoritarian nature of a capitalist mode of production, okay? That's the key problem here. So what they're basically saying here is they are admitting that they understand that this current makeup of inequality within the world is completely unsustainable, and they're afraid. So they are using these tax ideas, right? Oh, please tax us at, as they said, like, 2 to 5% is basically what they were suggesting in this letter or something, or whatever it may be. Even if it's 50%, again, that wouldn't be adequate at all. But they're basically saying, please, please, please tax us a little bit so that we can give you some crumbs within social programs to justify our sitting at the top of this capitalist hierarchy, so that we can continue that hierarchy and so that we can continue to profit off of the mass exploitation of workers around the world. So that's what they are actually saying here. And again, the solution to the problem of billionaires and the problem of inequality is not just to tax them, okay? That's not the end all be all. It's something that is somewhat of a good policy right now to remediate some of these things and to help, take some of their money and reorganize our economy more towards social programs, et cetera, but that only gets us to the position of being like, a social democracy like they have in some of the Nordic countries in Europe, right? But that's not the end all be all, because even those Nordic countries and those social democracies, they also have problems. They also have billionaires within those countries. They also have inequality within those countries. They do have robust social programs, but they also do rely on the exploitation of the global south, if you want to call it that. They rely on exploiting cheap labor overseas. So again, the problem exists within any capitalist society on earth. It doesn't matter if you have robust social programs for your own populations if the only way that you're able to do that is by exploiting and shipping that exploitation overseas, okay? You didn't solve the problem of exploitation, you just pushed it out of your own viewpoint, right? So again, the actual problem that needs to be addressed here is putting democracy within the workplace, putting democracy within the economy so that we don't have an unequal situation like this that develops at all in the first place. Now, with that all being said, right, and with the understanding that I'm a socialist and am I'm obviously going to have a socialist understanding of, where they're coming from in this position. But just to give you a perspective in terms of what these numbers that they're putting out here could actually do, like if we took this money from them and just put it directly towards some of these programs, it is kind of wild to think about, okay? This is how absurd their wealth has actually gotten to. So they say globally, there are 3.6 million individuals with over $5 million or more in wealth, and their total wealth is equal to $75 trillion. And they say there are 183,000 individuals with $50 million or more in combined wealth, worth $36 trillion. And then they point out the global billionaires, which there's just a couple thousand of them, and they have roughly $13.6 trillion. So basically 3 different brackets. We're talking about lower level millionaires with over $5 million, people with over $50 million, and then billionaires. Now, if you did even the most mild tax structure that you could possibly imagine, again, an annual wealth tax of 2, 3, and 5% respectively for those categories, that alone would raise $2.52 trillion a year. And then if you go and look at the costs of some of these other things, right, it's completely absurd how much could actually be done with this. So they say, what could this revenue be for? So according to the World Bank, there are currently 3.3 billion people living on the poverty line of less than $5.50 a day, which again, that's kind of a whack threshold to have, because somebody who's living on $5.51 a day or even $6 a day, they're not doing great, okay? They're just barely above this threshold. But they say it would cost on average $901 per person annually to lift someone living below the line to above the line. And the total cost of doing this for all 3.3 billion people living on less than $5.50 a day would be less than $3 trillion. Okay, so essentially, by these threshold numbers, which are nowhere close to being enough, but even so, according to this data, 3.3 billion people, okay, billion with a B, people, could be technically lifted out of poverty with $3 trillion. And you're telling me that motherfuckers like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk pretty much alone could account for a large portion of that? I mean, again, this is just completely unsustainable. It's an absurd economic situation to have globally and domestically here within the United States. And it seems like the billionaire class is somewhat starting to wake up to the fact that if something does not change, then the pitchforks are going to be out and they're going to be coming from them. And they're probably going to be on the short end of that stick when it comes down to it. So again, they somewhat should be afraid given the historical record. I'm not making any direct threats myself, but understand the nature of the capitalist system is inherently authoritarian. And that's why they're trying to call for, mild tax shifts on the global scale, and they're begging people to take some of their money away so that they can protect that authoritarian hierarchy that they continue to dominate. Okay, at a fundamental level, the reality of the situation is we are not going to solve any problems of inequality globally or domestically unless we get rid of the capitalist mode of production and move towards some sort of a democratic economic system.